We'll see two different scenarios. The first will show a common situation using current practices. The second scenario will show a potential way to use new roadside saliva drug testing. While much attention has been on marijuana since the passage of Prop 64, it's also important to note that the use of prescription drugs are a huge problem. The device we're demonstrating today tests for up to 6 different drugs, both illegal and prescription. It's also important to note that these devices and others like it are used in Europe and Australia by law enforcement. They've also been pilot tested in several cities here in our state, including right here in Sacramento. I'd like to introduce Tyler Eccles from the CHP, who will be narrating today's demonstration.
Thank you, Assemblymember Lackey. So what we have for you today are 2 different situations in which we're going to demonstrate what frequently happens out roadside as officers throughout the state enforce our state's DUI laws. And so in this first scenario, we're going to have one of our CHP officers make a stop on a vehicle, and the driver is being stopped for not wearing her seatbelt. So we'll begin with the stop. In this scenario, the CHP officer is representing all new law enforcement officers throughout the state who receive just basic training at their post academy. Most academies teach anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of DUI-related training. At the California Highway Patrol Academy, our officers receive 42 hours. However, in this scenario, Officer Martins is representing a newer officer here in the state of California. So the officer is making an approach on the passenger side of the vehicle because we're simulating that this stop occurred along a roadway where traffic is passing along the left-hand side. In this circumstance, the officer is paying attention to any odors or any smells that are coming from the vehicle, speech patterns, and any indications that the driver may or may not be under the influence of alcohol or a drug. The officer has some awareness that some field sobriety tests may be in order, so he's asked the driver to step out of the vehicle, and we're going to have him go to what's a simulated safe area to begin the process of evaluating the driver for a possible DUI. One of the first things that occurs is the officer goes through a series of preliminary field sobriety test questions in an effort just to ask the driver about their state of being, where they're coming from, where they're going to, and a little bit about any alcohol consumption or potentially any drug use. After going through these series of questions, we're going to have the officer at this moment in time transition to actually begin to perform some field sobriety tests. So this officer, as representing a newer officer here in the state, is going to go through what we call our 3-test battery, which is 3 standardized field sobriety tests that are scientifically validated. The first one's going to be horizontal gaze nystagmus. And so although we won't go through the entirety of this test, we will have the officer now, having gone through this horizontal gaze nystagmus test, transition into the walk and turn.
I want you to imagine a straight line in front of you. Put your left foot on that line like this, please. Place your right foot ahead of it on the line just like this. Hands on your side. Put them in that position while expanding and demonstrating the rest of this. In a minute, I'm going to have you take 9 foot toe steps down that imaginary line. Turn and take 9 foot toe steps back down the line. Just go like this. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 9. Reach your 9th step. Put that lead foot in place. Take the series of small steps. Take 9 toe steps back down the line like this. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 9. For the next test, I want you to keep your hands down your side. I want you to watch your feet at all times. Count each step out loud, and please don't stop the test until you're finished. You understand? Okay, go ahead and begin.
So after the explanation of the test, the officer is going to be aware of any specific indicators and clues which are present during the test that would give the officer indication that the person might be under the influence of alcohol or a drug substance, or a combination of the two.
All right, thank you.
We're going to transition to our remaining test that he's going to perform today, which is going to be the one-leg stand.
In a moment, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you raise one of your feet approximately 6 inches off the ground like this. I want you to make the bottom of your foot parallel to the ground. While looking at your raised foot and keeping your legs straight, I want you to count the following manner. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, and so on until I ask you to stop. Do you understand the test?
Yes.
Remember to keep your legs straight and go ahead and 6 inches off the ground, looking at your feet the whole time. Go ahead and begin.
1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, 5 1,000, 6 1,000, 7 1,000.
From this point in time, we're going to transition from the field sobriety test. We're going to make a few assumptions that the officer saw maybe a couple of indicators of potential influence. The officer's fairly new, maybe not that confident in making drug DUI arrests, but what the officer's going to do is administer a preliminary alcohol screening device to be able to see if the individual potentially has consumed any amount of alcohol. There is an advisement that typically goes along with this test, so the officer, we're going to say, has administered that advisement, and we'll be giving a simulated breath test to the driver. And we typically, or we always administer 2 tests of of what we call the PAS. And in this circumstance, the results from this scenario come back at a 0.04% blood alcohol. So in this circumstance, the officer saw very little indicators of any influence. The preliminary alcohol screening device came back at a 0.04. And based upon the totality of the stop, the officer makes a decision that there are not sufficient indicators for driving under the influence, and is allowing the driver to proceed and leave from the scene following the conclusion of the DUI investigation. We're now going to transition to our second scenario. In this second scenario, Corporal Mosley from the Sacramento Police Department is going to represent a higher trained officer here in the state of California, from the many different agencies that we have. That we're going to make an assumption that Corporal Mosley has been trained in what we call A-RIDE training, which is our advanced roadside impaired driving enforcement. And so he's got an intermediate training and is comfortable and confident with evaluating individuals for driving under the influence of both alcohol and drugs. So this second stop is going to be a little bit different. This driver has been stopped for erratic driving, for traveling in excess of 85 miles per hour on Interstate 80, and for weaving in and out of the lanes. Corporal makes the stop, and much like in the last scenario, goes to contact the driver of the vehicle.
Where are you going with it?
To work.
Okay. Would you mind taking a picture of it? Thank you very much. Where'd you work at? Do you have anything to drink for?
No. No.
At this point in time, the officer is going to request the driver to, like the previous scenario, to step out of the vehicle for a DUI evaluation. And much like in the last scenario, the officer is going to go through a series of questions prior to the field sobriety test, but we're going to transition here directly into our 3-test battery.
All right, so the first test I'm going to do, I'm going to have you actually look at the tip of my pen with your eyes and your eyes only. Do not move your head. Do you understand? Actually, I want your feet together, arms out by your sides. Just relax like that. Perfect. You see my pen? Okay. All right, I want you to follow my pen with your eyes and your eyes only. Don't move your head. Do you understand? Don't move your head. Don't move your head.
We're going to transition from the horizontal gaze nystagmus test directly into the walk and turn.
All right, so we're going to imagine there's a straight line right in front of you. All right, What I want you to do is put your left foot on that straight line, imaginary line. Put your right foot directly in front of your left foot, touching heel to toe. Keep your arms just relaxed down by your sides. Just like this. Okay. Stay in that position until I ask you to begin. When I ask you to begin, I want you to take a series of 9 heel to toe steps down this imaginary line. You're going to turn around that method I'm going to show you and take 9 heel to toe steps back. While walking, I want you to look at your feet. I want you to count your steps out loud. I want you to keep your arms up by your sides. And once you start this test, I don't want you to stop the test until the test is complete. It's going to look just like this, okay? 1, 2, 3, and so on with the 9. Nice step, turn around, taking a series of small steps. And back. 1, 2, 3, all at the 9. I take 3 steps, you take 9 steps. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Go ahead and begin.
So now the officer is focusing on the manner in which the driver performs these tests, specifically looking for clues and indicators associated with balance and the ability to not only pay attention but to multitask. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. Now we're going to transition into the one-leg stand.
Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to stand with your heels and toes together just like so. Arms just relaxed down by your sides. Alright, when I ask you to begin, you're going to choose a leg that's going to be your preference. I want you to lift that foot approximately 6 inches off the ground, keeping the bottom of your foot parallel to the ground, keeping your legs straight and your arms down by your sides. While your foot is in the air, I want you to look at your toe and count in this manner. 1001, 1002, 1003, until I tell you to stop. It looks just like this. 1001, 1002, 1003, and so on. I'm looking at you, but you'll be looking at your toe.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?
No.
Go ahead and begin.
Now, 1,
And additionally, during this test, the officer is paying attention to specific identified clues,
4,
which also would
5,
give the officer indication that the person potentially is driving under the influence.
1008, 1009, 1010, 1011, 1012, 1013,
Okay,
1014.
Okay, so we're going to simulate here that the field sobriety tests are done, and based upon the field sobriety test, the officer does have indication and indicators and clues that the person is potentially driving under the influence. The officer is still going to administer a preliminary alcohol screening device test.
Okay. What I want you to do is just have a seat right here. Sit tight.
Profile. Turn.
All right. So what I want you to do is I want you to blow into this machine. Blow until the machine beeps. It's about a 3-second
We're
breath.
going to simulate as well
Ready?
that the officer is given the standard advisement prior to administering the preliminary alcohol screening device. We're going to make an assumption that 2 tests were taken, and that the tests, much like in the first scenario, come back at a 0.04% on both tests. Now the officer has those indicators and clues that the individual is driving under the influence, and he suspects to be both a combination of alcohol and drugs. And in this scenario, that although he's made a decision that he believes the person's under the influence, he wants to administer a secondary test, which is going to be an oral fluid test.
So, based upon my knowledge, I'm going to have you actually do one more test for me, okay? It doesn't require you to do anything else but stick a device into your mouth, and I just need to collect some saliva. So again, have a seat right here. Okay, can you go ahead and pick this device, the white tip, into your mouth by your cheeks and just collect your saliva on it? All right, that's good.
And at the completion of swabbing on the inside of the mouth, the officer is going to test the oral swab in the oral test device machine itself. And for purposes of this scenario, we are going to stipulate that upon completion of this evaluation, that the device registers a positive result for the presence of drugs. So upon completion of the field sobriety test, a preliminary alcohol screening device test, and an oral swab test, the officer is going to make the decision to make the arrest.
All right, ma'am. At this point, you're under arrest for DUI. We're going to complete a DRE evaluation of you.
So the officer is going to request a drug recognition expert to respond back to the station to perform a more comprehensive evaluation of the driver that has been arrested. We're going to simulate here in this circumstance that the driver has been taken back to the station, and we now have a DRE officer. Officer Orloff is going to be conducting a 12-step process. The Drug Recognition Evaluator program is more than 100 hours of training that an officer receives, significantly advanced training, to help them not only make a determination as to whether or not somebody is under the influence, but specifically to make a determination regarding which drug or drug categories the individual possibly is under the influence of. And so in this circumstance, we're going to simulate that they're back at the station and that the officer is going to walk through a standardized process based upon his training. And so I'm going to just go through the list of those 12 steps. The very first step is to administer an additional breath test. In this circumstance, the DRE officer often isn't out on scene. They are simply called in to go back to the office to perform an evaluation, and so they are an independent individual making a determination following the arrest. They then conduct an interview of the arresting officer to find out reason for the stop, and they conduct what's a preliminary evaluation examination. They administer a pulse. They also take a look at the individual's, after taking a pulse, they take a look at the individual's eyes. The DRE officer additionally administers many of the same standardized field sobriety tests that were conducted roadside. There are 2 additional tests that are administered during the DRE evaluation that were not seen roadside. One of them is the finger to nose, and the other is the modified Romberg balance. Following those standardized field sobriety tests and those divided attention psychophysical tests, he will then take an additional pulse and go through vital signs of taking a heart rate and a body temperature. One of the unique aspects of a DRE evaluation is also looking at the eyes in a dark room. We do a dark room examination where we observe an individual's pupils in a room with darkness, where we take a specific pupil measurements, both with light introduced into the eye and without light. The 9th step is to check the body for any injection sites or physical indicators of any drug use. And towards the end of the evaluation, the officer conducts an interrogation of the suspect if they are willing to speak to the officer. The officer then determines and makes an opinion as to whether or not the person is under the influence. In this circumstance, the officer does make the determination that the person has been driving under the influence of alcohol in combination with drug substances, and that a toxicological examination is requested from the suspect and a blood sample is given. It's critical in these circumstances just to understand the importance of the role that the DRE officer plays in being able to make that determination, and the role that the oral fluid test plays in drug driving enforcement in general. And so at this point in time, we're going to conclude the 2 scenarios as it relates to the first one with the brand new officer that was simulated with minimal training, and the second one that has an intermediate officer that's trained and the drug recognition expert that comes in to help make those determinations. And I will now turn the time over to Assemblymember Lackey.
Okay, I'd like to extend a big thanks to the California Highway Patrol, the California Peace Chiefs Association, Sacramento Police Department, and Lear Toxicology, for helping make this demonstration happen today. I would also like to introduce David Swing, the first Vice President for the California Police Chiefs Association, who would like to just express a few sentiments right now.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. David Swing on behalf of the California Police Chiefs Association. And it's proven over the years, drug driving is an emotional conversation. But there's one fact that we cannot deny, and that is that drug driving kills indiscriminately. We in law enforcement have the sworn duties to protect members of our community and save lives. I'm happy to be here today to show how drug driving detection efforts work in California. Just last week, a father of 4 from Olivehurst was killed by a driver while he changed a tire in Roseville in the middle of the day. The suspect was taken into custody for driving under the influence of marijuana. This is not an isolated case. In my own city of Morgan Hill recently, we had a double fatality collision where inside the suspect vehicle were marijuana paraphernalia. We don't yet know the decedent's toxicology, as has not yet come back from the lab, but clearly it's an issue that affects all of our communities in California. As was mentioned earlier, just last month, it was reported that for the first time in history, drivers killed in crashes are more likely to be on drugs than drunk. 43% of drivers tested in fatal crashes in 2015 had used a legal or illegal drug, surpassing the 37% who tested above the legal limit for alcohol. Unfortunately, while law enforcement has many tools to combat drunk driving, zero tolerance for those underage, administrative license revocation, a per se standard of 0.08, our drug driving toolbox is far less equipped. As California ushers in a for-profit marijuana industry driven by increases in consumption, it is critical that law enforcement be equipped with the necessary tools to identify, deter, and prosecute drug-impaired driving. Assemblymember Lackey kickstarted this effort as co-author of the 2015 Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, in ensuring that the act included a study on the impacts of marijuana on motor skills. And while this study will assist us in identifying the qualitative signs of impairment, such as response time and coordination, much work is still needed on developing quantitative measures of impairment. Other states have answered this question, and that is how much THC is relevant or equivalent to 0.08 for alcohol. We hope that additional research and data will help us answer that same question for California.